Welcome to the Hanley Effect, a podcast by the Hanley Foundation designed to educate, change minds, and save lives. Our goal is to inspire you, showcase our innovations, and change the conversation about addiction and mental health. Join us as we unravel stories of resilience, recovery, and hope.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Hanley Effect. I'm John Dyben.
I'm Rachel Docekal.
Hi, Dr. D. How are you this morning?
Dr. D. How are you?
I'm doing well. I love being in this specific studio. There's just something warm and kind of comforting about it.
Maybe it's just the lights are warm.
I think so.
It's cozy. So good.
Well, before we go off on lights and warmth and such, I'd love to talk about our guest that's here today and make sure we give her as much time as we can. Today, we've got Jessica Lahey. Jessica's an author. She is, an author both of books and an article. She wrote the Gift of Failure, which I cannot wait to talk about as both a parent and as a human being, because it's the gift of failure, how the best parents learn to let go so their children can succeed. And as a dad, and I know you as a mom, man, that idea of letting go so our children can succeed. And she has written a lot about addiction and recovery as well. So we're just so thrilled to have you here. Thank you, Jessica, for being here with us.
I'm just so happy to be here. I'm grateful to anyone who wants to talk about my work. It's sometimes as a writer, you feel like you're just sort of writing. I have my little hidey hole in the Vermont woods, and I kind of forget sometimes it goes out into the big bad world.
Well, and as just looking at the title, thinking about, as a parent and this concept of letting go, can we start there? And I'd love to learn a little bit about the things that you're writing about now. And then also we'd love to know about you and what brought you to this place of writing about so many different things.
I am extremely fortunate in that I have an incredible job where I get to write about, people pay me to write about things that I get curious about, whether that's, I had a column at the New York Times for like 3 years, called the Parent Teacher Conference. And it was about, writing about the confluence of education and parenting. And when I was writing at the Atlantic, I was like, I wonder about this. And then I got to write an article about that. So The Gift of Failure and my second book, The Addiction Inoculation, which is about preventing substance use in kids, both of those books are the books that I was looking for and couldn't find and needed. And so I get to, hide away, do research for a couple of years and then come out with a translation of that research for other people who may have the same questions. It's my dream job. I love this job.
And your entire, so you have, you started your education with a BA in comparative literature, and you then went and got a JD. So
I did. I was positive I had it all figured out, as we do in our 20s. I had a mentor who's now actually a person in the North Carolina House of Representatives. She was also a judge. And before that, she was an assistant district attorney. And she became my mentor. And I was positive that I wanted to work in juvenile justice, which it's one of those sort of road not taken sort of situations. But I was asked to start teaching. I was asked to teach a class before I finished law school. And it was really clear that that's what I should do with my life. And I finished law school, but I went directly into teaching after law school.
You're a parenting expert. I mean, I
don't know. I think people, yeah. Okay. So I'll go with the premise, but let's see where you're going with this one.
Well, as a parent myself, I'm a much better parent today than I was when I was younger, obviously. You've collaborated with Hanley in the past on parenting. And one of the things that we teach, and I believe you teach, is that concept that you want to be a C parent, right? That you're going to have F days and you're going to have A days, and you sort of come out as a BC parent, but that's okay. That's okay because, it is that, it is that education that you get as you go forward. Talk a little bit about the gift of failure and, that concept of failure and those F days.
Well, it's funny what you were just talking about with, we do the best we can with the information we have, and we hope we're doing well. But I had a conversation with my daughter, who's now 21, and she was talking to me about something I wish she had been capable of having a conversation about when she was 6, but she didn't have the words for it then.
Sure.
And we were talking about we use timeouts for both kids, and she was talking about very specifically why the way we did timeouts didn't work for her, like what was happening in her head when she was 6. And oh my gosh, I wish we had I had the subtitles, like toddler, older subtitles to understand why, oh my gosh, this worked so great for her brother. Like this was a foolproof method for her brother. And this is not working at all for this kid. But I had to wait until she was, 20 before we had a really good conversation about how hopeless she felt during that time and why then she was reacting to that hopelessness as opposed to what we were assuming she was, we assumed she was sitting there thinking about how could she be a better human being and why, So from my perspective, even though she's in her 20s now, the best I can do is say, you know what? I'm so sorry. I did the best I could with the information I had. I was working under what I thought at the time were best practices. And it just didn't occur to me that best practices for one kid might not be best practices for another. I know a lot more now. I would do it differently now. But the good thing is, if she ever has kids, the fact that we had that conversation now means that she's cognizant of something I wasn't cognizant of. All this parenting stuff is long game stuff, whether it's about our own kids, whether it's, thinking more in the long term than in the short term. And with this kid, I'm not going to be putting her into timeout anytime soon, but she might be doing that in the future. And I want her to have the best possible coping skills and to be modeling the best possible practices, which is to do the best we can with the information we have. And if we learn how to do better, we do a mea culpa and we move forward with better information. That's what makes great parents, I think.
I think the last piece of what you said is probably the most profound, the mea culpa. The mea culpa.
And I think about, being myself, shocking as it is with my youth, I'm a grandfather. And so, my oldest is almost 28 and has a 5-year-old of her own.
You're freaking me out because my oldest is 26 and not there yet, but okay, I'm with you. I just had a little brain, a little aneurysm. I'm good now though.
That's okay. We all have those moments. But the principle of, people always say everybody's heard, right? Oh, being a grandparent's so wonderful because you get to play with the kids and then you give them back. That's nice. What no one ever told me was when you watch your kid be a great parent, it is overwhelming and astonishing. Yeah. And so what you just said about, because as parents, I think we get this idea sometimes that I got, if I, haven't done it all right by the time they're 18, that, all of my parenting, everything is just useless. And remembering that it is a long, multi-generational game and that, thinking about the fact that being able to have those conversations with your, you're still parenting. You're still that parent, and I'm still parenting, but now parenting an adult child and being able to have conversations about what worked for them as a kid and what didn't. It just gives me so much hope that there's not, we tend to think sometimes I either did okay as a parent or I failed as a parent. Sure. And the truth is that it's a long game and we're still in it.
Yeah. I mean, the challenges are different, but, from talking to a kid about one of my kids about a decision they made about a relationship that was a really, really hard decision, that those conversations are so important too. And it's really important to be present and thinking about, and even just, I was talking to a parent recently who had like a breakup with a friend who she realized it was a really toxic relationship. And that friend was causing all kind of chaos in her life. And, she also realized she wanted to model for her own children what friendships should look like, that friendships should not be this thing that tear you down. They should be this thing that lift you up. And she realized I didn't want my children seeing the friendship I had with this person and thinking that's what a friendship should look like. So we're continuing, to do this throughout their lives. Sometimes they're listening and watching, and sometimes they're just watching. And more often than not, it's the stuff we do as opposed to the stuff we say that they're really paying attention to anyway.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. So thinking about switching just a little bit, we're still talking about parenting, but this idea of your other book that you mentioned and this idea of inoculating children from addiction. And there are, I think there are a lot of things in prevention. People say a lot of things about prevention, and you'll hear people say things like prevention doesn't work. Everybody's going to use whatever drugs or whatever they're going to use.
It's so incorrect. It's so incorrect.
So wildly incorrect. Now, and people will point to prevention things that didn't work. But the truth is, prevention that is based on sound foundations, not only does it work, it's incredibly effective. Can you talk a little bit about your approach and this idea of your idea of prevention and that parenting role in it?
So keep in mind, it's only been in the past generation or so that we've been able to look inside, that we've had the technology to look inside the human brain as it does stuff, as it's learning, as it's being used. We can look at it through PET scans and fMRIs and things like that. So our understanding of what's happening in the brain is really new. And our understanding of what works for prevention is fairly new. So for the past decade or so, we've had a steady decrease in use of all substances in adolescents and kids and adolescents. And that's because we've figured out that scared straight and just say no just don't work. And what does work is understanding how the brain works, explaining that substance use during adolescence is a different beast altogether than substance use during adulthood. Once the brain is done developing, there's far lower risk of substance use than in an adolescent brain, where the brain is very what we call plastic or acutely susceptible to environmental whatever, whether that's the chemicals you put in your brain from outside or the stuff that's happening around you. So that's why education is improving. We can see how kids learn in the brain. If we look at people like Mary Helen Immordino Yang at USC, who's looking inside the human brain as it is, as we are attempting to teach, to see what lights up the learning centers of the brain and what doesn't. We can also look inside the human brain when someone uses a substance. We can look at the difference between the hippocampus of a kid who does use weed and who doesn't use weed. We can look at, there's all kinds of things we can do that we couldn't do before. And substance use prevention works. And the better we get at it, hopefully, the more we can be nimble. So, for example, the one area where we have been failing in prevention is that boys used to outdrink girls. Alcohol used to be more a boy thing and less of a girl thing. And now it's more of a girl thing than a boy thing. And which is interesting because we have to look at what's affecting girls these days. If we can be nimble enough to pivot and say, okay, so why is it that suddenly girls are drinking at higher rates than boys? Like, yay, boys are drinking less, but at the same time, also what's causing girls to drink at higher levels? And that appears to be anxiety and stress. Okay, well, what's causing, we have to be able to look at the root causes of these things and pivot according to what we perceive the root cause of that to be. And just say no doesn't do that. Scared straight doesn't do that. We have to get at those root causes.
It's so perfectly put. And those things, that is the message I think people need to hear again and again, because when people say prevention doesn't work, that's what they're talking about. They're saying, man, you had the DARE programs and Scared Straight and all those things. And now we've got research that says not only did they not work, but they actually may have been counterproductive.
That's right. Actually, we have research to show they definitely were. One of them in particular was counterproductive, that kids were more likely to use after having gone through certain programs.
Absolutely right. But the key is that none of those people were doing their best with the information they had, but there was no science or study behind it. And today, the programs the prevention programs that are out there and that exist have that basis, a scientific foundation, and they really work.
And in fact, we have objective third parties looking at
Right.
The programs, for example, that we deploy in schools, and instead of trusting the program itself to evaluate itself, the organization that comes up with the program to evaluate itself for efficacy, we have organizations coming from the outside to say, let's take a look. Does this actually work? And we're willing to say it's promising, but there's no real evidence yet. Or yes, we're seeing that it definitely works. And the most effective programs we know of start very young, pre-K and kindergarten. And when I say substance use prevention, I'm also referring to all kinds of other prevention, mental health, making sure that kids understand, self-efficacy, self-advocacy, bodily autonomy, all of those things, anti-bullying, anti-substance, all that sort of stuff. Tend to get wrapped up in these programs. And we know what works and we know what doesn't. So why we put any money behind what we don't know, what we are crossing our fingers and hopes works, and I was very guilty of that. I thought for sure that, if I give my kids sips at home, that I could raise them like those quote moderate European drinkers, and that would somehow inoculate them against like freaking out when alcohol was available to them. And it doesn't do that. It does the exact opposite. So, for a lot of reasons, and which I've gone into many times over, and really, really upsets people for some reason, I think because they're emotionally wedded to that magical thinking.
So Hanley Foundation does evidence-based youth prevention in 34 counties here in Florida, but we're in classrooms. We're in classrooms. So what type of advice would you give to parents? I mean, prevention is not available to all kids. Unfortunately, it should be. Right. But where would you start this conversation with parents?
Well, I have spent, for whatever reason, a lot of time in your state over the past year. In fact, I was there twice in 2 weeks recently. So number one, just start. Like you have to start. A lot of parents think, I'll start talking about this in middle school when it becomes, something we have to talk about. Not true. We need to start very early, and we need to start with things like, sweetie, if you see something on the floor that looks like candy, make sure you talk to an adult before you just pop that in your mouth, because a lot of medicines can look like candy. Or, there's one I talk about in the addiction inoculation, an example. Why do you think we spit toothpaste out instead of swallowing it? Like if we put it on the outside of our teeth, wouldn't it be, I don't know, even better if we swallow it? Or, here's why we don't put those, laundry pods in our mouth, that kind of stuff. And that is substance use prevention. Like when we're talking about, why do you think mommy's name is spelled out on this medicine bottle? Couldn't, if you had the same thing I have, couldn't you just take this medicine? Well, no, because this is just for me, and you never take medicines that are prescribed to someone else that don't have your name on the bottle. All of those conversations developmentally, you just follow your kid along, and that's why there's so many scripts. If I learned anything from my first book, and I do a ton of speaking in schools, and if I learned anything from my first book, it's that people want scripts, because especially if a conversation is scary for them, here's exactly at this age and this stage how you can approach this topic. And, I underestimated with my first book how much people wanted those scripts. So fine, I'm happy to offer them. Get started. Think long-term instead of short-term. Don't think in terms of the emergency that's right in front of you right now. Think like long-term, where do I want my kid to be in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years? And just make sure that you understand that in the absence of talking, kids are going to be paying attention to what we're doing. So make sure that we're modeling. A lot of parents ask me, oh, okay, does that mean that effective substance use prevention means that I can't drink in front of my kids? And no, absolutely not. But it does mean that we need to be thinking about the messages we're sending about why we drink. If we come home from work and we're like, oh my gosh, I had the worst day, I need a drink, or whatever, that kids are going to take that and say, oh, that's how we deal with emotions we don't like, or that's how we deal with bad feelings, is we drink at them. Great. Okay. Got it. That's how I'll do so far. So, coping mechanisms and things like that, and numbing out, things like that. We need to be thinking about our messaging.
Yeah.
So I love that. And again, as a parent and as a therapist, I want to be aware of time, but I'm curious about something.
Sure.
And I asked you about one thing, but for those who are listening, I need to describe. For those that are watching, you can see behind you is a wall, and,
a really fun wall.
And it's a really fun wall, and there are lots and lots of different little knickknacks and pictures and things. Can you tell us just a little bit? There is a purpose to this wall. Can you tell us a little bit about your wall?
Oh, and now there's a cat.
And now you're.
So when I was really little, my father he's a retired industrial designer, and he had a very big, tall wall in his office. He worked in an old straw hat factory, and he had this big, tall wall, and it had stuff just all over it from his travels all around the world and from designing and all that sort of stuff. And I wanted a wall like that desperately when I grew up in my office. So that's essentially where my wall comes from. And I'm actually not a really sentimental person. I don't tend to keep a lot of things. This is all the stuff I have kept. Like there's a picture behind me of my husband's application to medical school and what he looked like after he'd been in medical school. And then I have another picture actually, which is his looking pretty darn tired after a year of medical school. And then just other things like one of my niece's wrestling medals is behind me. This is Power Girl up here. My friend said that I remind him of Power Girl because of the, that kind of thing. One of my grandfather's fishing baits is behind me. He has died, but I have one of his baits because fishing with my grandfather was something I remember with great fondness. Yeah, it's just stuff like that.
I love the Harry Potter.
So there are wands behind me because one of the things that I say a lot is, I wish I had a magic wand and I could just make that better for you. Whether it's my kid is suffering from a substance use disorder and please give me the magic words to make this better. There aren't. It's just, I'm desperate to help and to do the best I can, with the research that I've done. But sometimes there aren't magic wands. So when my kids outgrew their love of wands, I stuck them on my wall because they signaled to me that sometimes there isn't a magic wand. It's just a lot of hard work.
Yeah, that's right.
So your kids are going to watch this and realize that you jacked their wands. I'm just saying.
Know. They're very aware. Now they're 26 and 21. I think they're well done with them.
That's so funny.
So as we're coming to our last few minutes, and I so appreciate this time, and I'm thinking about, those important messages to parents, that start now. Recognize that that kids are watching you. If you need the scripts, there's a great book called The Addiction Inoculation, Raising Healthy Kids in a Culture of Dependence. And actually, it's got scripts.
Can I mention that my favorite scripts in there actually aren't mine. They came from hundreds of adolescents. I asked them for the best excuses they could come up with if they were out at a party and someone offered them drugs and alcohol and they didn't want to use. What are the face-saving, while understanding that no is a complete sentence, what are the face-saving excuses they could use if they didn't want to feel like a dork at a party? And so there's like 2.5 pages of those, and I love those. They're brilliant. I couldn't have come up with those.
Fantastic.
The idea of actually listening to kids when you're trying to figure out what's the best way to talk to kids. Yeah. What a brilliant idea.
Well, that's why when I said I was been in your state a lot lately, I was in Orlando and Tampa and a bunch of other places in your state. And whenever I do a talk at a school, I talk to the kids during the day and then parents in the evening. And one of the things I do is I send a little welcome video or make sure all the kids get my email somehow. And I say, what's on your mind? What do you want me to talk about in the context of what I'm an expert in before I get there? And I get a lot of emails. I got 60 recently from a school in Tampa. Yeah, 60 questions from kids in a school that actually wasn't that big. And they were great questions. They were about sleep and stress and anxiety and perfectionism and caffeine and all these questions that, if I'm actually, instead of talking at kids, what would be great is if we could, engage in a dialogue with them. And so actually what I've been doing with the answers to those questions is on my website. If you go to jessicalahey.com under videos, there's a bunch of videos there for gift of failure stuff, a bunch of videos there for addiction inoculation stuff. And the new series is answers to student questions because their questions are brilliant and not necessarily things I would have thought would be on their minds.
I love that.
I love that.
Well, we are producers telling we are out of time, but I just want to repeat that though, the JessicaLahey.com.
Yep.
And it's JESSICALAHEY, right?
Yep.
.com.
Everything is there.
And that's a great place for parents to go. Jessica, thank you so much for taking your time. I know you are so busy. We're so grateful to have you here today.
This was terrific. Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful for anyone who's willing to open these conversations. They're really important.
Yeah.
Our pleasure. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. D, as always.
Thank you, Dr. D. This was fun.
This was really cool.
Really.
And thanks to everybody who's listening or watching. We'll see you next time on The Hanley Effect.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for The Hanley Effect. To learn more about our programs, visit hanleyfoundation.org or call 844-502-4673.